Out of a recent survey analyzing over 5 million employees, researchers from Mercer uncovered a staggering statistic regarding the modern workforce. For every one person operating with a visible disability, there are 6 people navigating their daily responsibilities with a disability that cannot be seen by an outside observer.
We have constructed a professional and social culture where health is presumed, and illness is only validated when it is accompanied by undeniable visual proof. When the evidence of a condition is internal, the burden shifts to the individual. They are forced to continuously prove their limitations to an audience that is naturally skeptical of what it cannot observe.
We are unpacking the reality of invisible illness today, specifically focusing on adrenal insufficiency. This exploration is anchored by a compelling article from the publication My Adrenal Life, which examines why adrenal insufficiency functions as a serious disability even when the person living with it appears unaffected. The piece explores the profound disconnect between a person's outward appearance and the intense physiological effort required just to maintain baseline stability. We want to analyze the medical mechanics of this condition, the historical context of how it has been understood, and the societal demand for a visual performance of sickness. When someone does not provide that visual performance, their struggles are routinely dismissed, often resulting in an internalized shame.
The My Adrenal Life article highlights a crucial tension regarding physical capacity. Capacity with adrenal insufficiency fluctuates unpredictably. A person might execute a high-level presentation at work on Tuesday and be unable to get out of bed on Wednesday. To the outside world, that inconsistency is often misinterpreted as a lack of effort, a character flaw, or unreliability. In reality, it is a hallmark of an endocrine system that cannot self-regulate.
Let us build the foundation by looking backward into the medical archives. How did the medical community first identify a condition that operates primarily beneath the surface? The adrenal glands are small structures sitting on top of the kidneys, and for centuries their function was a mystery to anatomists.
The formal recognition dates back to 1855. A British physician named Thomas Addison, working at Guy's Hospital in London, published a landmark monograph titled On the Constitutional and Local Effects of Disease of the Suprarenal Capsules. He detailed 11 cases of patients suffering from severe fatigue, profound weakness, and a peculiar darkening of the skin. At that time in history, the scientific community knew almost nothing about what the adrenal glands did. Addison's work was revolutionary because it connected these systemic, debilitating symptoms to the failure of these specific, tiny glands. Historical records show that in Addison's era, the primary cause of this adrenal destruction was tuberculosis, which was rampant across Europe. It is also fascinating to note that 2 of his original 11 cases appear to have been triggered by severe, intractable pain.
There is a poignant historical footnote regarding Thomas Addison himself. While he was a brilliant diagnostician who mapped out this invisible physical illness, he suffered from his own invisible battles. Historical accounts note that Addison dealt with severe bouts of depression throughout his life, eventually dying by suicide in 1860. There is a dark irony in the fact that the man who pioneered the study of a disease characterized by profound lethargy and mood changes was consumed by his own internal struggles that his colleagues could not treat.
That historical context adds a layer of depth to how we view invisible suffering. Today, the etiology of the disease has shifted since the 19th century. Tuberculosis is no longer the leading cause in developed nations. Medical literature now categorizes adrenal insufficiency into distinct types based on where the communication breakdown happens in the body. Roughly 80% of primary adrenal insufficiency cases in developed countries are caused by autoimmune disease. The body's immune system mistakenly attacks the adrenal cortex, slowly destroying the tissue until it can no longer produce hormones. This primary form is still referred to as Addison's disease.
But primary adrenal insufficiency is only a fraction of the broader picture. The data indicates that secondary adrenal insufficiency is far more prevalent, and its origins are often different.
Secondary adrenal insufficiency originates in the pituitary gland, which acts as the master control center in the brain.
If the pituitary fails to produce adrenocorticotropic hormone, or ACTH, the adrenal glands do not receive the signal to produce cortisol. A recent epidemiological study published in the Journal of Clinical Endocrinology and Metabolism found that hospital admissions for secondary adrenal insufficiency increased by over 90% between 2000 and 2019. A major driver of this is iatrogenic, meaning it is caused by medical treatment. When patients are prescribed long-term systemic steroid medications for conditions like severe asthma, rheumatoid arthritis, or other autoimmune diseases, their pituitary gland senses the synthetic cortisol in the blood and stops sending signals to the adrenal glands. Over time, the adrenal glands atrophy. When the patient tries to taper off the medication, their natural production system cannot wake up. This creates a massive demographic of patients dealing with a severe invisible illness triggered by the treatment of another condition.
I want to focus on cortisol because popular culture has reduced cortisol to a near buzzword. We hear about it constantly in the context of wellness influencers telling people to lower their cortisol to lose weight, reduce stress, or sleep better. But for someone with adrenal insufficiency, a lack of cortisol is not a wellness goal. It is a life-threatening crisis. Break down the actual physiological role of this hormone.
Cortisol is fundamentally a hormone of survival and systemic regulation. It manages blood pressure, regulates metabolism, reduces inflammation, and modulates the sleep-wake cycle. When a healthy person encounters a stressor, whether that is a psychological stressor like a tense meeting, or a physical stressor like catching a flu virus or breaking a bone, their brain signals the adrenal glands to pump out more cortisol to help the body handle the increased physiological demand. For a person with adrenal insufficiency, that mechanism is broken. If they catch a standard stomach bug, their body cannot mount the necessary cortisol response. Without manual intervention, which means taking supplementary oral or injectable steroid medication, their blood pressure can plummet. This leads to an adrenal crisis, a state of hypovolemic shock, and potentially death if not treated urgently in an emergency room.
Let us use an analogy to clarify this baseline physiological process for the listener. A healthy endocrine system functions like a sophisticated smart thermostat in a house. It senses the temperature dropping outside and automatically kicks on the furnace to keep the internal environment stable. The homeowner goes about their day and never has to think about the temperature regulation.
That analogy captures the hidden labor of the disease. A person with adrenal insufficiency lives in a house where the automatic thermostat has been permanently disconnected. They have to act as the thermostat manually every hour of the day. They must monitor the external temperature, guess how much fuel the furnace needs, and adjust the dials themselves by timing their medication doses. If they miscalculate during a sudden blizzard, or in the context of the body, an unexpected infection or a stressful life event, the pipes freeze. The cognitive load of monitoring your own basic physiological stability is exhausting. That mental burden exists separate from the physical symptoms of the disease itself.
This brings us to the workplace dynamics highlighted in the My Adrenal Life article. We operate in an economic system that values consistency above almost all else. Employers expect a baseline of output every single day. When we look at federal protections like the Americans with Disabilities Act in the United States or the Equality Act in the United Kingdom, they require reasonable accommodations for disabilities in the workplace. But I will play devil's advocate here to explore the tension. How does a company practically accommodate fluctuating capacity? From a strict operational standpoint, a manager might argue that if an employee cannot reliably deliver on a Tuesday, the invisible nature of the disability does not negate the negative impact on the business.
That is the friction point many patients navigate, and it is where the traditional corporate mindset fails. Accommodating fluctuating capacity requires a paradigm shift away from measuring physical presence and toward measuring overall output and value. Flexible work hours, the ability to work remotely on low-energy days, and asynchronous communication are practical, reasonable accommodations that cost the employer very little. The Mercer report on invisible disabilities suggests that providing these structural flexibilities does not harm productivity. It often enhances retention, loyalty, and the quality of work produced.
The resistance usually stems from a rigid corporate culture that values visibility over efficiency, rather than an actual operational impossibility. The My Adrenal Life piece emphasizes that individuals with adrenal insufficiency can function at high levels and contribute massive value to their fields, provided they are not penalized for the days their body mandates rest.
We see this phenomenon of toxic productivity infiltrating every corner of our lives. The cultural messaging insists that pushing through exhaustion is a badge of honor. We celebrate the executive who sleeps 4 hours a night, or the athlete who plays through a severe injury. When you apply that toxic framework to someone with a broken endocrine system, the results are catastrophic. Pushing through an adrenal crash does not build character, it precipitates a medical emergency. Yet, when the disability is invisible, the individual internalizes society's skepticism. If you look fine, but you decline an invitation or call in sick to work, the default assumption from peers is that you are being flaky, uncommitted, or lazy. The article stresses the importance of respecting your body's needs without shame. But dismantling that shame is a monumental task when the external world demands proof of your suffering before offering empathy.
Dismantling that shame begins with separating one's innate worth from one's immediate physical capacity. Medical literature notes that symptoms of adrenal insufficiency include brain fog, dizziness, nausea, and profound fatigue. These are subjective experiences. A routine blood test might show stable sodium and potassium levels on a given morning, but the patient might still feel incapable of standing upright. The medical community itself has historically struggled to validate subjective symptoms that do not show up on a basic metabolic panel. Releasing the shame involves accepting that your lived experience is the ultimate authority on your capacity. You do not owe an employer, a friend, or a stranger a visual performance of illness to justify your biological need for rest.
We also need to acknowledge the broad spectrum of functionality within the patient community. The article makes a crucial point that many individuals with adrenal insufficiency can and do participate in demanding environments. The danger lies in assuming that because one person with Addison's disease can run a marathon, manage a corporate division, or travel without issue, every single person with the condition should be able to replicate that level of activity. The variability between patients is vast, and comparing outcomes is a dangerous trap.
To diagnose adrenal insufficiency, endocrinologists often use an ACTH stimulation test, measuring baseline cortisol, injecting synthetic ACTH, and measuring the adrenal response. Even after diagnosis, the treatment is not uniform. The standard replacement therapy, oral hydrocortisone, is an imperfect science. The healthy human body secretes cortisol in a circadian rhythm, peaking in the early morning to wake you up and tapering off throughout the day to allow for sleep. Oral pills cause sharp spikes and rapid drops in the bloodstream, failing to replicate that smooth, natural curve. This artificial delivery system leaves many patients experiencing a roller coaster of energy. One person might require 20 milligrams of hydrocortisone a day and feel stable, while another might require complex subcutaneous pump therapy, constant monitoring, and still experience frequent adrenal crises. The clinical goal should always be defining what a manageable day looks like for your specific body, without holding yourself to the standard of a fellow patient.
The legacy of invisible disabilities is a long history of marginalization and quiet endurance. We are beginning to see a necessary shift in the cultural narrative. Advocacy platforms and patient-led publications like My Adrenal Life are forcing a re-evaluation of what disability looks like in modern society. As we conclude our analysis today, the fundamental takeaway is a redefinition of validation. Medical frameworks provide the clinical diagnosis and legal frameworks provide the employment protections, but the day-to-day reality requires a fierce personal commitment to bodily autonomy.
It requires honoring the urgent signals your body sends, even when those signals contradict the expectations of your employer, your social circle, or your own internal ambition. The absence of visible symptoms does not equal the absence of a severe disease. Recognizing your limits is not a failure of willpower, it is an act of necessary self-preservation.
We must actively foster environments, both in our professional sectors and in our personal relationships, where people are believed the first time they state their limits. The energy a person spends defending the reality of an invisible illness is energy stolen from their healing and their life. If this conversation brought you value or challenged your perspective on invisible conditions, please send the link to this episode to a friend or colleague who needs to hear it.